Hey guys, and welcome to my very first guide to practicing an excerpt. I am going to do a lesson on how to prepare Lieutenant Kije for auditions. So I'm going to talk about sound of the drum and what gear I recommend you use. I'm going to talk about the grace notes, how they should sound and how you play them. I'm going to talk about accents versus unaccented notes, which is actually my biggest pet peeve about Lieutenant Kije. And then I'm going to talk about some ways you can practice it. Okay, so there's an old story about auditioning for the Chicago Symphony, which I don't actually know if it's true. I don't actually know who was involved, but I've heard it before. So it goes like this. The Chicago Symphony is one of the only big orchestras that does cattle call auditions, which means basically anyone can apply an audition. So this guy hears about the audition and he decides to take it, and he starts practicing for months and months, and they have notoriously long lists, and he's practicing, you know, a huge pile of xylophone music and bells and accessories and snare drum. He gets to the audition after months of this, months of work. He goes on stage and the first thing they call is Lieutenant Kije, the bane of my existence. Puts his snare drum up, he gets his sticks out, and he goes up to the instrument, takes a deep breath, and he plays. And he hears, "Thank you," and that's it. His audition is over, it's all over. I can't tell you how many times I've felt like Lieutenant Kije has ruined my audition. It's the kind of thing that makes me shake, and I get tight, and I worry about the exact consistency of the grace notes, and there's just so many things to worry about. I want to show you how I play it, but I also want to show you what the most common things that are wrong with it when students play for me or when I listen to auditions like at the Met or elsewhere. But I have a lot more to say about Lieutenant Kije. So if you're actually learning it and you want to go through the excerpt, I'm going to make a full training video and an accompanying sheet of exercises where I go through every measure and I give you the sticking, I talk about phrasing ideas, and I give you exercises to work on each little issue throughout the piece. And you can go get that at robknopper.com/Kije, K-I-J-E. And if you appreciate this video and you're learning something from it, you can show me by sharing the video, by hitting the thumbs up on the YouTube page, and by subscribing to my YouTube channel. So this piece is very military style. I mean, obviously, Lieutenant Kije. It starts with this really soft, distant, muted trumpet sound. It's very beautiful, and then the snare drum comes in and is supposed to sound like a military march off in the distance. I think it sort of foreshadows sadness, but when the snare drum comes in, it's supposed to sound kind of joyful and dutiful. In the orchestra, you could play this with a lot of different kinds of drums. You could decide to play it with a thicker, wider, fatter sound. Maybe a type of drum that would have been played in early to mid 20th century. When you're playing it for auditions though, and I found this through a lot of blind testing while playing for non-percussionists, who's going to be the majority of your audition panel normally, it's definitely advantageous to have a smaller, more compact sound, a more staccato, tighter, drier, easier to listen to sound. Non-percussionists don't want to be bombarded by a huge, fat, thick sound. So what I use is a Pearl Philharmonic 4x13. At the time I got this, maple was the only kind of wood they make it out of. That might still be the case. On this drum, you can get a super dry but really nice popping, projecting sound. I love the sound of this drum, and I just put a thin strip of muffling on it. Usually I just use a little silk handkerchief that I get on Amazon or something like that. I clip it on. I use CL3L Chris Lamb Innovative sticks for this. I'm pretty sure they don't make those anymore, so you have to find something else. But you want to have a heavier stick so that it doesn't feel like chopsticks in your hand, but you also want to have something with a smaller bead. If you do want to put some more motion, it's not going to come out as super loud when you play. So the grace notes. How they should sound, the 3 grace notes leading to the primary note should be shaped to the primary note. Should it be a diagonal crescendo? Should it be a trumpet bell crescendo? You can play with that, but it definitely has to sound like it's crescendoing to the primary note. The primary note comes out as a single on the beat note, and the other notes just have to feel like they're going to the primary note, picking up to the primary note. In terms of spacing, it's tempting to play them really close together. Your ears are right above the drum, so you can hear every distinct little sound if you play them really tight. But when you're playing an audition, you're across the whole room from the audition panel, and it actually really affects how they hear it if you play it too tightly. So I try to pull them apart. I actually had a breakthrough one time where I realized I can play these really wide, and it actually sounds better to the audience when they're listening to it. Okay, dynamics and accents. Here's my pet peeve. People play the flams, the 4-stroke roughs, and the 3-stroke roughs as accents. They're not accents. When a non-percussionist looks at this page, they see accented notes and non-accented notes. And there's no logical reason to play the non-accented notes, even if they're flams, as accents. And this is the most common thing that people do when they come in for lessons with me. And then they don't even accent that one on beat 3 of measure 8 that's supposed to have an accent. So you want to make a very distinct difference between all the accented notes and all the non-accented notes. That doesn't mean that it has to be flat. Within the non-accented notes, you can have little inflections, and you should. You have to have some kind of musicality. You have to show a direction. You can do that among the accented notes and among the non-accented notes. There just has to be a difference, a big difference. Something that worked for me was to think of them as 2 different pitches. My teacher told me that one time, and it works. So here's how to work on it. One thing that happens a lot of the time is that when you play these figures, especially the 4-stroke roughs, the doubles are almost always not timed correctly. They get in the way of the primary note. They push the primary note back, and it's because there's too much happening at once for you to really detect the issue. So I really recommend that you guys work on this hands apart. If you're just playing the right hand part and you're looking straight at your right hand, you're more likely to find the problem and to know what the fix to the problem is than if you're playing hands together. So one thing you can do is just put the left hand on the rim. You can still play the full excerpt, but just look at your right hand, listen into your right hand. And vice versa. When you look at the hands separately, it's actually not that hard what's going on. It's just that you don't usually look at the 2 hands separately, so sometimes it's hard to see. The second way you should practice it that doesn't work without the third way, which I'll say in a minute, practice with the metronome on every single quarter note. You have to wire in the correct amount of time that the 8th notes and the 16th notes should last so that you can stay in the right tempo, which, by the way, when you listen to a ton of recordings and you take the average, it's almost always 120. But the problem is that that makes you start to follow the metronome, and you don't actually build subdivision structure in your mind. You don't build time in your mind so that you can play it without the metronome. So you also need to build that. That's the third way of practicing it. So put the metronome on every measure, on the first beat of every measure. What is that? Quarter note equals 30, I guess. What it does is it forces you to develop that inner sense of subdivision. When you play a measure and you don't end up lining up with the metronome on the next beat, you know that you need to stretch it a little bit more next time, or you need to crush it a little bit more next time. And you're just training yourself to guess what the subdivision should be versus before when you were just following and you didn't actually have to be responsible for the subdivision yourself. If you're getting obsessed with this piece, and more power to you if you are, I have a free training that I'm making. It has everything about the sticking, all the phrasing ideas that I want to tell you about how to shape each measure, and also exercises for all of the hard parts within this piece so that you can actually get started practicing on your own in the practice room. You can have access to that separate training at robknopper.com/kije, K-I-J-E. There's a few other resources you could check out. There's the Black Swamp video by Sean Tilburg. There is the Lee Vincent articles and exercises about this piece. And finally, the video in Will James's collection, The Repertoire, although you have to pay for that. Cool, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.